In one quiet suburban neighborhood, a black family found themselves targeted by the HOA's most notorious board member, Karen. She filed a formal complaint against them for playing loud music, even though it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a time when no rule was being broken. But while Karen tried to label them as disruptive, the family uncovered something far worse. Behind her crusade to police others, Karen was secretly running an illegal Airbnb out of her home, something that violated every HOA rule she claimed to defend. And when the truth came out, the tables turned in spectacular fashion. The Harris family had moved into the neighborhood with simple expectations. Marcus and Alicia, along with their 2 young kids, wanted the same things as everyone else: a safe place to raise their children, good schools, and a home where they could relax after long workdays. Marcus worked in IT for a large company, often from home, while Alicia was a nurse who pulled long shifts at the hospital. They were not loud or flashy people. They valued family time, backyard barbecues, and the occasional Saturday afternoon filled with music and laughter. For the first few weeks, their moves seemed to go smoothly. Neighbors stopped by to say hello. A few kids introduced themselves to the Harris children, and everything appeared normal. But it didn't take long before Karen made her presence known. Karen was one of those HOA figures who treated the neighborhood as though it were her personal kingdom. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it was more of a smirk than anything friendly. She carried herself with a sense of authority, walking her dog with a clipboard in hand, constantly jotting things down about other people's properties. For years, she had intimidated residents into silence, nitpicking about everything from the shade of paint on shutters to the placement of trash bins. When she first encountered the Harris family, her greeting was cool at best. "Welcome," she said flatly one afternoon, barely making eye contact with Marcus as he was unloading groceries. "I hope you'll remember that this is a quiet neighborhood. We take rules seriously here." Marcus nodded politely, brushing off the tone. "Of course, we're just glad to be here." But Karen wasn't looking for reassurance. She was looking for problems. At first, it was subtle. Karen would linger near the Harris property longer than necessary during her dog walks, peering at their yard as though checking for violations. If Marcus played a little music while mowing the lawn, Karen was sure to appear outside, frowning and shaking her head. When Alicia had her sister over for a visit, Karen took note of the extra car parked in the driveway and later made a pointed comment at a neighborhood gathering about people turning their homes into parking lots. The Harrises tried to ignore it. They had dealt with difficult personalities before and assumed Karen's fixation would pass, but Karen wasn't the type to let things go. Her need to control wasn't about maintaining harmony. It was about having power over others. And when the Harrises didn't bend to her unspoken rules, she grew bolder. It came to a head one Saturday afternoon. The Harrises had set up a small speaker in their backyard, playing R&B while grilling for lunch. Their kids splashed in a small inflatable pool, laughing and shouting in the warm air. It was 3 o'clock, hardly late, and well within any reasonable standard of neighborhood peace. The music wasn't blasting. It was just background sound, filling the yard with energy and joy. But Karen wasn't having it. She stormed over, marching straight up to their fence, her dog tugging on the leash as she waved a finger. "This is unacceptable," she barked. "You can't play music like this in the middle of the day. People are trying to rest. This is a violation of HOA noise policies." Marcus, standing by the grill, wiped his hands on a towel and kept his tone even. "Karen, it's 3 in the afternoon. We're not breaking any rules. The music's not even loud enough to be heard inside the house with the windows closed." Karen scoffed. "I'll be filing a formal complaint. You'll see. This is a quiet neighborhood, not a block party." With that, she stormed off, already typing furiously on her phone. True to her word, the Harrises received a notice from the HOA a few days later. It stated that a complaint had been filed against them for disturbing the peace with excessively loud music. Notice included a warning that further violations could result in fines. Alicia was stunned when she read it. "This has to be a joke," she said, waving the letter in disbelief. "It was 3 in the afternoon. How is that disturbing the peace?" Marcus shook his head, frustration flickering across his face. "It's not about the music. It's about her. She's looking for reasons to paint us as bad neighbors." They could have argued with the board immediately, but instead, the Harrises decided to remain calm and observant. If Karen wanted to play games, they would document everything. And that's when they began noticing something odd about Karen's own home. There were cars coming and going at all hours, strange vehicles that nobody recognized. People with suitcases arrived late at night, sometimes leaving just a day or two later. Delivery drivers dropped off large bundles of towels and cleaning supplies at her doorstep. Occasionally, Marcus spotted strangers fumbling with the lockbox on her front porch. At first, the Harrises thought maybe Karen had relatives visiting frequently, or perhaps she was renting out a room long-term. But as the pattern repeated itself week after week, it became clear something else was going on. These weren't visiting friends or family, these were guests. Alicia's suspicion grew when she overheard two young men chatting outside Karen's house one morning. "This place was cheaper than the downtown hotels," one said, wheeling his suitcase toward the door. "Hope the host left the key like she said." Host. Hotels. Marcus and Alicia exchanged a knowing look. That night, Marcus decided to do a little digging. A quick search online confirmed what they suspected. Karen's address popped up on an Airbnb listing. Fully furnished, cozy suburban getaway, complete with staged photos of her living room, kitchen, and guest bedrooms. The reviews went back months, full of praise for the host and her quiet neighborhood. It was all there in black and white. Karen, the same woman who had reported them for playing music in the middle of the day, was running an illegal short-term rental business out of her home. And according to the HOA bylaws, short-term rentals were strictly prohibited. The Harrises couldn't help but laugh at the hypocrisy. Karen had spent weeks nitpicking their every move, positioning herself as the guardian of neighborhood rules. Yet she was the one breaking them in the most blatant way possible. And unlike a petty noise complaint, her violation wasn't just about preference. It had real consequences: safety concerns, strangers flooding the neighborhood, and liability issues for the HOA. Marcus leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a half-smile. "She went after us for music at 3 in the afternoon. Now she's about to answer for running a hotel out of her house." The Harrises knew exactly what they had to do next. The discovery of Karen's illegal Airbnb was almost too perfect. Marcus and Alicia had been dealing with her constant nitpicking, her smug sense of authority, and her eagerness to drag them into trouble for nothing. And now, here she was, openly violating the same HOA rules she claimed to uphold. But the Harrises weren't impulsive people. They understood the value of patience. Rather than rushing to expose Karen right away, they decided to play it smart. They began gathering evidence. Marcus started by saving screenshots of the Airbnb listing. Every photo, every guest review, every mention of the host. He even archived the page, so that even if Karen tried to take it down later, the proof would remain. Alicia kept track of the constant stream of new visitors. Families unloading strollers, groups of young adults arriving with coolers, couples pulling up late at night with suitcases in tow. She jotted down dates, times, and even descriptions of the cars that parked in front of Karen's house. Within a week, they had compiled a thick folder of observations. And the best part? Karen had no idea she was under scrutiny. Meanwhile, Karen continued her crusade against the Harrises. The initial noise complaint hadn't gotten the reaction she wanted, so she doubled down. At the next HOA meeting, she made a point of singling them out. "I've already filed one complaint," she said sharply, addressing the board as though she were the president herself. "This family has no respect for the community. Music blasting, cars in and out, gatherings that disrupt the peace. If we don't enforce the rules, this neighborhood will go downhill fast." The Harrises sat quietly in the back of the room, listening without flinching. Marcus resisted the urge to roll his eyes, while Alicia kept her expression calm. They knew the truth, and they knew the right moment to reveal it hadn't arrived yet. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. Some of them respected Karen's zeal, but others were clearly tired of her constant complaining. One finally spoke up. "Karen, the complaint was for music at 3 in the afternoon. That doesn't exactly qualify as disruptive. Everyone's entitled to enjoy their home." Karen scoffed loudly. "That's the problem. If you let people slide on little things, soon the whole neighborhood will be a circus. We have rules for a reason." Her words carried the self-righteousness of someone who believed she was untouchable, and for years she had been. Most residents didn't dare challenge her because they feared being her next target. But the Harrises weren't afraid. They weren't just documenting her hypocrisy. They were waiting for her to push too far. Sure enough, another letter arrived in their mailbox a few days later. This time, the HOA notice claimed repeated disturbances had been reported at their address. The board warned that further incidents could result in fines. "This is ridiculous," Alicia muttered, holding the letter. "She's literally manufacturing complaints." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let her keep digging. The deeper she goes, the harder she'll fall." And Karen, oblivious to the trap she was walking into, just kept digging. That weekend, she made yet another scene. The Harrises had invited Marcus's cousin and his family over for lunch. The kids played in the yard while the adults chatted on the patio. No music this time, just conversation and laughter. Still, Karen appeared at the edge of her driveway, glaring at them like they'd committed a crime. Later that evening, Alicia spotted Karen talking to one of the board members, gesturing wildly toward their house. The neighbor looked uncomfortable, but nodded politely before retreating. It was clear Karen was determined to build a case against them, even if she had to twist reality to do it. But what Karen didn't realize was that her own actions were painting a far uglier picture. That same weekend, 2 groups of guests arrived at her house. The first, a family of 4, showed up Friday night, unloading duffel bags and groceries from the back of an SUV. The second, a young couple, arrived Saturday afternoon, right as the Harrises were saying goodbye to their visitors. Karen greeted them both warmly, smiling in a way the Harrises had never seen her smile at anyone else. She handed one of them a key and whispered instructions before ushering them inside. Alicia shook her head in disbelief. She treats us like criminals for grilling in our backyard, but she's running a hotel next door. Marcus grinned. Oh, she's not just running a hotel, she's running an illegal one. The more they watched, the more obvious it became. Different guests cycled through every few days. Karen's driveway was constantly filled with unfamiliar cars. One morning, Marcus even overheard 2 guests arguing about whether the host had provided enough towels. That was the moment Marcus realized they had enough. It was one thing to catch her breaking a rule, but this wasn't just a technical violation. It was a full-blown operation, and the HOA's bylaws couldn't be clearer. Short-term rentals were strictly prohibited. Still, Marcus wasn't content with just showing the screenshots of the Airbnb listing. He wanted Karen's hypocrisy exposed in a way that couldn't be denied. So, he went one step further. He created an account and tried booking a weekend stay at Karen's house. Within hours, he received a cheerful response from the host, confirming availability and sending detailed check-in instructions. The listing even included photos of the exact rooms Marcus had seen strangers entering. He saved every message, every confirmation email, every screenshot. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the Harrises were ready. Karen, of course, wasted no time launching into another tirade. This family has repeatedly disrupted the neighborhood, she announced to the board, her voice dripping with disdain. If we don't find them, we're setting a dangerous precedent. We can't allow people to disregard the peace and quiet we've built here. The Harrises stayed silent, waiting. Marcus could feel Alicia's hand resting lightly on his arm, steady and calm. They knew their moment was coming. The board members, clearly weary of Karen's complaints, nodded politely, but said little. Some exchanged glances with the Harrises, as though silently acknowledging the unfairness of it all. And then, when Karen finally paused to catch her breath, Marcus spoke. His voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of quiet confidence. With all due respect, he said evenly, if we're going to talk about respecting HOA rules, then maybe we should also address the issue of residents running illegal short-term rentals out of their homes. The room fell silent. Karen froze, her eyes widening as though she'd been caught in headlights. Marcus pulled out a neatly organized folder and placed it on the table. Because according to these screenshots, guest reviews, and even booking confirmations, someone here has been operating an Airbnb, something explicitly prohibited by our bylaws. The effect was immediate. Gasps filled the room as board members leaned forward to study the papers. Karen's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing without a sound. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, the Harrises felt the power shift. Karen's reign of intimidation was crumbling, and this was only the beginning. The silence that followed Marcus's words was thick enough to cut with a knife. Board members shuffled in their seats, flipping through the papers he had laid before them. Screenshots of Karen's Airbnb listing, reviews mentioning her wonderful hosting, and even the booking confirmation Marcus had secured himself. Karen's face had gone pale. She fumbled for words, finally sputtering, This is a mistake. You can't prove that's me." Marcus didn't even flinch. He slid another page forward. It was a screenshot of Karen's living room from the Airbnb photos, complete with the same floral curtains and family portrait still hanging above her mantel. "This looks like your home, doesn't it?" Marcus asked coolly. "I think we all recognize those curtains." A few muffled chuckles rippled through the room. Karen's authority, once unchallenged, was slipping away by the second. But true to her nature, she refused to surrender quietly. Her voice rose, sharp and defensive. "So what if I rent out a room? That's none of your business. At least I'm not disrupting the neighborhood with loud parties." Alicia spoke up then, her voice calm but carrying a sharp edge. "Karen, we've never had a party. We play music for our kids in the backyard, at 3 in the afternoon. That's the best you could come up with to accuse us of breaking rules." Meanwhile, you've been running a hotel out of your home for months, bringing complete strangers into this community at all hours. That's not just disruptive, it's dangerous. The board members nodded grimly. One of them, a man named Tom who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades, leaned forward. Karen, you know very well short-term rentals are strictly prohibited. We've told people this before. You've been enforcing that rule on others for years. And now you're the one breaking it? Karen's composure cracked. She slammed her hand against the table. This is a setup! They're just trying to turn everyone against me because I care about this community. None of you would even bother enforcing the rules if it weren't for me. Her outburst only made things worse. The same neighbors she had intimidated for years were now openly shaking their heads. People who had once stayed silent were finally speaking. I've seen people dragging suitcases into your house, one woman piped up. I thought it was odd, but I didn't say anything. Now it all makes sense. And there was that time I caught one of your guests parked across my driveway, another neighbor added. When I confronted him, he said he was renting your place for the weekend. The weight of collective voices pressed in on Karen, stripping away her last shred of control. But instead of admitting fault, she doubled down. This is ridiculous, she shouted. I've given years of service to this neighborhood. And this is how I'm repaid? By being ganged up on because I had the courage to complain about people disturbing the peace. You'll all regret this when this neighborhood falls apart. But her rant fell flat. The board had heard enough. The president cleared his throat and looked at Marcus and Alicia. Thank you for bringing this evidence to our attention. We'll be addressing this matter formally. As for your family, we consider the noise complaints resolved. You've done nothing wrong. The Harrises exchanged a quiet glance, relief washing over them. They hadn't just defended themselves, they had turned the tables completely. Karen stormed out of the room, muttering curses under her breath. But Marcus and Alicia knew this wasn't over. Karen was too prideful to admit defeat, too stubborn to let go of the control she had clung to for so long. Sure enough, the days that followed were tense. Karen avoided them on the street, but her glare was sharper than ever when their paths crossed. Neighbors whispered that she was furious, claiming she'd been set up by the Harrises. A few of her closest allies on the board tried to smooth things over, suggesting maybe Karen just didn't realize the rules about short-term rentals. But the truth was undeniable. She had broken the very bylaws she had weaponized against others. The board called a special meeting the following week to vote on disciplinary action. Marcus and Alicia didn't attend this time. They didn't need to. Their evidence spoke for itself. Word spread quickly afterward. Karen had been fined heavily, ordered to shut down her Airbnb immediately, and warned that further violations could result in legal action. It should have been the end of the story, but Karen couldn't let it go. Instead of quietly accepting the punishment, she escalated her behavior. She confronted neighbors who had spoken out against her, accusing them of betrayal. She left passive-aggressive notes on mailboxes, insisting she had been targeted unfairly. And one evening, as Marcus returned from walking the dog, Karen marched across the street to block his path. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, her face twisted with anger. "You think you can waltz in here, break all the rules, and make me the villain? You don't belong here. I'll never let you ruin this neighborhood." Marcus stared at her evenly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even take a step back. "Karen, we followed every rule. You didn't. That's the difference. Maybe it's time you looked in the mirror." For a moment, Karen's mouth opened as if she had a retort ready, but nothing came out. She spun on her heel and stormed back to her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. That was the breaking point. Karen realized her grip on the neighborhood was gone. No one feared her anymore. The very people she had bullied for years now saw her as the hypocrite she was. And while she raged behind closed doors, the Harrises carried on with their lives, calm, steady, and vindicated. The battle wasn't just about music or noise complaints. It was about fairness, dignity, and exposing hypocrisy. Karen had tried to control the narrative, but in the end, her own actions told the story more clearly than the Harrises ever could. The night of the HOA's official hearing on Karen's violations, the community center was packed. Word had spread quickly, and nearly every resident showed up. Not because they expected drama, but because for once, the tide had turned. People who had been silent for years were eager to watch Karen finally be held accountable. Karen arrived late, striding in with her chin high and a thick binder under her arm. She wore her usual smug expression, as though she still believed she could talk her way out of anything. The murmurs in the room grew louder at the sight of her, but Karen didn't acknowledge them. She marched straight to the front and took her seat, slamming the binder on the table like a lawyer preparing for trial. The board president called the meeting to order. Tonight's agenda concerns violations of HOA bylaws. Specifically, the operation of short-term rentals within the neighborhood, which are expressly prohibited. Karen immediately raised her hand. I'd like to begin by saying this entire proceeding is a witch hunt. Certain residents, her eyes flicked toward the Harrises, seated quietly in the back, have decided to target me personally, using fabricated evidence to smear my name. This is nothing more than retaliation because I dared to file legitimate complaints. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but the board president held up a hand for silence. He turned to Marcus. Mr. Harris, you may present your evidence. Marcus didn't stand up to grandstand. He didn't need to. Calmly, he opened the same folder he'd shown at the previous meeting and laid the documents out in front of the board. Screenshots of Karen's Airbnb listing. Guest reviews praising Karen, the wonderful host. Booking confirmations complete with her address. Even the staged photos of her living room and bedrooms that matched her home exactly. This is not fabrication, Marcus said firmly. This is public information. Karen has been operating a commercial business out of her home for months, bringing strangers into our neighborhood in clear violation of the bylaws. We received this confirmation ourselves when we attempted to book a stay. The president flipped through the pages slowly, his frown deepening with each one. Finally, he looked up at Karen. Do you deny this is your home pictured in these listings? Karen's face burned red. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but her voice was defiant. It doesn't matter. The rules are outdated. Everyone else gets to bend them, so why shouldn't I? I've done nothing wrong. In fact, I've brought money and attention to this community. That was the wrong thing to say. From the back of the room, a neighbor stood up. Nothing wrong? One of your guests parked in front of my mailbox for 3 days straight. I had to miss mail deliveries, and when I knocked on your door, you pretended not to know them. Another voice chimed in. I had strangers knocking on my door at midnight because they couldn't find your place. Don't tell me that's not disruptive. The floodgates opened. For years, people had quietly grumbled about Karen but never dared to challenge her. Now, with proof in front of them, they unloaded every grievance they had. Stories of rude Airbnb guests, late-night noise, traffic jams, and safety concerns poured out into the room. Karen's composure crumbled. She tried shouting over them, insisting they were exaggerating, but the voices only grew louder. The board president finally banged his gavel to restore order. We've heard enough, he said sternly. The evidence is overwhelming. Karen, you have clearly violated the HOA bylaws. Effective immediately, you are fined $10,000 for repeated and deliberate violations, and you are ordered to cease all short-term rental activity. Failure to comply will result in further legal action. The room erupted into murmurs again, this time tinged with satisfaction. For once, justice felt tangible. Karen's face contorted with fury. She shot to her feet, slamming her binder shut. This is outrageous! You're all ungrateful. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart. I've been the only one enforcing the rules around here, and this is how you repay me? But no one rushed to defend her. The same people who once nodded obediently to her lectures now sat back in silence, letting her tantrum echo against the walls. She stormed out of the room, her heels clacking angrily on the floor, muttering curses under her breath. For the first time, the neighborhood felt lighter. Her departure wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Her grip on the community had been broken. The board quickly moved to dismiss the bogus complaints against the Harrises. The noise violation was erased from their record, and the board president offered them a formal apology. You should never have been subjected to this. Thank you for your patience and for handling this situation with dignity. Alicia smiled politely, though inside she felt a swell of relief. Marcus gave a simple nod. They hadn't wanted a fight, but when the fight came to them, they'd stood their ground and won. As neighbors filtered out of the meeting, many stopped to shake their hands. Glad someone finally stood up to her, one whispered. It's about time she got what was coming. Another added, you handled this better than I ever could have. Respect. For the Harrises, the victory wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness. They had moved into the neighborhood hoping for peace. And instead, they had been treated like intruders. But now, everyone had seen the truth. Karen had accused them of being disruptive for playing music at 3 in the afternoon. Yet she had been the one filling the neighborhood with strangers, noise, and chaos. And now, exposed and humiliated, she had no power left to wield. The balance had shifted, and the Harrises finally felt at home. After the ruling, Karen shut down her Airbnb, though not without plenty of grumbling. Strangers stopped showing up at all hours, and the neighborhood quickly felt calmer and safer. The HOA kept a close eye on her, making sure she didn't try to sneak the operation back into business. Without her position of power, Karen faded into the background. Neighbors who once tolerated her constant policing now avoided her, no longer afraid of her threats or complaints. Her credibility was gone, replaced by whispers about how the rule enforcer had been the biggest rule breaker of all. The Harrises, meanwhile, settled back into their lives. They weren't just vindicated, they were respected. Their calm persistence and the way they exposed Karen's hypocrisy earned them the support of the neighborhood. Karen had tried to paint them as disruptive over a harmless afternoon of music. But in the end, the only real disturbance was the illegal hotel she had been running. And when the truth came out, it silenced her more effectively than any music ever could.